What a game. What a strange game, but it wouldn't be a primetime game in Pittsburgh if you didn't have weather eventually get involved. What a game for Pitt. A victory for the Pitt Panthers as they do defeat North Carolina in overtime 30-23. And if any of you are watching this after the fact, Pitt had this game well in hand for a while. North Carolina was able to fight back and try to come back, but Pitt eventually ends up with the W at the end of the day. This is your Pitt postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, Pittsburgh Sports Now. I'm your host, Mike Asti, and I will be joined by a familiar voice, face, and byline to our network here at PSN, Mitchell Northam, who is the digital content producer with North Carolina Public Radio, so has some UNC connection down there. And also, of course, bylines, the Associated Press, here, Pittsburgh Sports Now, and many other places. And Mitchell, we kind of had a watch party there, watching that together, as we thought we were about to have this game over with probably 40 plus minutes ago. It seemed like Pitt had this certainly secure at 1.17-0. Then 23-7, Kenny Pickett, the offense clicking. They did settle for some field goals. Maybe they would have rather had touchdowns, but North Carolina couldn't really do anything. It felt like Pitt's defense was stepping up, and it felt like entering this game, the defense would step up the most, would win, because these two teams have great offenses. Pitt's defense let them down a couple games earlier this year. And then you get to the second half, and weather got involved a little bit. It didn't rain as hard as it did there towards the end of the fourth and overtime earlier in the second half, but then Pitt just couldn't get going, and North Carolina eventually, with Sam Howell, able to get points on the board. Pitt gets the win 30-23. What's your instant reaction to this victory for Pitt? Does this still feel like a big win for the Panthers, or is it diminished at all because they let North Carolina come back and they kind of lost what could have been a dominating win? It's not as impressive as maybe it would have been, but when you have a special year, you're going to fight and claw and get victories like this, and Pitt did win.
Yeah, I think a win is a win. And this is certainly a big win for Pitt because, it puts them in the driver's seat for the Coastal Division title. UNC was kind of, maybe creeping up, trying to play spoiler a little bit. They beat Wake Forest last week. I think that's one of the reasons why this is a big win. I mean, we know what the North Carolina team is capable of. They beat Wake Forest last week, who was undefeated, who was ranked in the college football playoff in the top 10. So this North Carolina team is dangerous, despite some of the losses that they've had this year, despite those hiccups against Virginia Tech and Florida State. They can beat good teams. They can play with good teams. They showed that tonight. Pitt had that big lead. They were up 17-0. They were up 23-7. Kind of squandered it a little bit. But at the end, when the game came down to its crucial moments, they stood tall, and they made the plays when they needed to. For the defense, the one stat that really sticks out to me is, they kept North Carolina to 0 for 4 on fourth downs. Mac Brown tried to go for it a lot on fourth down. And every time Pitt snuffed them out. So those crucial moments, that bend not break sort of style of defense, paid off tonight for Pitt. I think this is a big win. Like I said, we know what this North Carolina team is capable of. They came into the season ranked. Sam Howell is a great quarterback, right up there with Kenny Pickett. Both of them are going to be, first, second round picks, something like that this year. There was a lot of scouts on hand there at Heinz Field tonight, checking both of those guys out. This is a good win for Pitt.
It's a good win for Pitt for sure. And certainly this is a different North Carolina team than lost to Virginia Tech to open up the season with the 17-10 score that sounds ridiculous based on what we've seen later on from North Carolina this year. They lost to Georgia Tech. They lost to Florida State. They have some bad losses on their resume, which is why they're not really in the midst of a special year and going to secure a bowl victory next week against Wofford, you would imagine, but basically crawling into it. And that's why they're able to kind of get funky and go for it on fourth down, and they don't have much to play with. They kind of wanted to play the role of spoiler here, and they are a great, talented team. They kind of also pose the matchup of the teams that beat Pitt this year. Pitt losing to Miami, a talented team that can score, a solid quarterback, losing to Western Michigan. That's a MAC team. They've lost a bunch, but they also could put points on the board, and the defense for Pitt wasn't enough in those games. So that was the kind of recipe to trip Pitt up this year. and it didn't happen on this night. So that's another reason why this is a big victory, even though Pitt does squander a lead in this game. And I'm sure there are some Pitt fans that are watching this game thinking, oh, we're about to pit this up a little bit, because that additive still kind of exists in their mind. Pitt does get the win over North Carolina 30-23 in overtime, in a rainstorm once you get to overtime here, but Pitt does get the win as they continue that Coastal Division Championship year, looking for an ACC title, and then on to a solid bowl appearance. The ACC kind of shut out of the playoff this year with that Wake Forest loss, and Pitt tripped up a couple times, but a solid season for Pitt nonetheless. Now, you mentioned Sam Howell and Kenny Pickett, and we'll get to them in a moment here to evaluate both of them. Kenny Pickett in particular, 25 for 44, 346, 3 TDs, does have a pick, so he has turned it over a little bit more recently than he was earlier on in the season. Sacked 4 times. The offensive line, a little bit of a poor day against Duke that kind of carried over a little bit in this game, and they did get a little bit on the ground with Olakanda, 60-plus yards, but not what they were getting even 3-4 weeks ago when they were getting 100-yard rushers, and that was helping the offense overall. Before we get there, though, just simply Pitt having that 17-0 lead, then 23-7 at halftime. North Carolina, obviously a great offense. The over-under on Vegas was 73.5 last I checked before the game, and I thought that was crazy low. It ends up being high. Vegas was smarter than us, as they usually are. But was it that Pitt was no longer playing well and something Pitt was not doing in that second half? Or did North Carolina just wake up and eventually turn it on, kind of like they did against Wake Forest, eventually leading them to a victory in that game? They don't win this one. But what changed from the first half to the second half to make it this close game?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of Pitt's offense, maybe just not being able to carry over that momentum into the second half, and then also North Carolina's defense and their offense both stepped up in the second half. You look at kind of the drives that Pitt put together in the second half, and we have a punt, we have a missed field goal, we have a punt, we have an interception in the red zone, and then that drive that sort of fizzled out there at the end of regulation. So Pitt put up all those points in the first half, but yeah, it just didn't kind of quite have that same potency on offense there in the second half. And the decision to kick those field goals in the second half, yeah. I think for the most part those were the right choices. Sam Scarton can make those field goals from 53 yards out. We've seen him do it before. And then the one at the end of the first half, the one that got blocked, that's another one where there's only 26 seconds left. You're at the 13-yard line. It's 4th and 2. Could you go for it? Sure. But also it'd be nice to get some points on the board before halftime. So I'm fine with the decision to kick those field goals and to go for it. Pat Narduzzi being often criticized for maybe kicking field goals a little bit too much. In those situations, I think it was the right move. But yeah, I think, UNC just played with a little bit more urgency in the second half on offense. They played in the first half, a little stale. Pitt's defense got after them. In the second half, though, they really played like that team with nothing to lose. You mentioned, 5 wins on the year, kind of the best they can do at this point is bowl eligibility, and they're going to hit that next week against Wofford anyways. So I think they were willing to just kind of put all their cards on the table and really just ball out. And they, played like a team with nothing to lose in the second half.
And kind of as they should at this point in the year, and you saw the 2-point conversion, that is Mac Brown. He kind of is willing to be aggressive. It eventually led him a national championship. He's a long way away from that now. But, yeah, he feels like this year kind of got away from him. But at this point, what else do you have to lose? Do you feel there's any controversy in this game? We saw the review there at the end on whether or not that was a reception or not there, and what looked like an Odell Beckham or David Tyree catch from the Super Bowl there kind of at his helmet. We've seen the referees involved a little bit in this game, maybe more than some fans would like. Was this in any way a ref show? Obviously, Pitt does get the win. They let a team come back, so obviously Pitt can't complain about that. North Carolina, they can't complain either because they started so sluggish early in the game. But did the refs play a role at all for you?
I think for the most part, it seems like the refs kind of got it right, because a lot of those questionable calls were kind of in the direction of North Carolina. And They ended up losing anyways.
Yeah.
There was those calls were in North Carolina's favor. The weird kind of Tyree helmet catch. There was a couple other ones in the first half there. So I think at the end of the day, the right team won. The team that deserved to win won. If you're a Pitt fan and you lose this game, maybe you have some louder complaints about what happened, but they got the W, so it is what it is. Probably don't need to linger too much on how the refs played a role. Able to kind of take care of business on their own.
And I'm sure Pitt fans are used to, over the years, losing games with controversy, losing games that were close, losing games that they blow a lead. So
just had one a couple weeks ago with Miami,
right. Just had one last time they were on national television against Miami. And that year kind of ruined it from being maybe a chance at more than just the ACC title this year. So Pitt to get the victory, even if it's in the slop, even if it's in overtime, even if it's blowing a lead, certainly the important thing for the Pitt Panthers. Pitt does win 30-23 in overtime over North Carolina. Solid game, not an offensive shootout that many would have thought. I think you're going to be weirded out by the final score if you didn't watch this and you just look at the box score. Mitchell Northam here joining me on our Pittsburgh Sports Live and Pittsburgh Sports Now post-game show. Head over to Pittsburgh Sports Now for the game recap and all the video reaction here from Narduzzi players here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, as well as on PSN. Now, I do want to get to these two quarterbacks because this is a quarterback matchup. I think that's why the over-under was set where it was. Obviously, what North Carolina did last week to Wake Forest with 58 points. Pitt with the best offense stat-wise in the country. Pickett for a while was a Heisman candidate. That's probably gone now. Sam Howell getting a lot of tout for the next level as well, being compared to a young Ben Roethlisberger by some. Sam Howell goes 22 for 33, 296, 2 TDs, 1 pick, was sacked 5 times, despite him being so elusive. So the offensive line did not help him out in this game, a QB rating of 156 even. And that also is after a sluggish start. The offense didn't get going until almost the second half, whereas Kenny Pickett, as I read earlier, 25 for 44, 346, 3 TDs, a pick, 4 sacks, and a 140.8 quarterback rating, which is almost low for him based on what he's put up most of this season. Between these two, who do you think is right now more suited for the next level? Who would you have more confidence in if you are an NFL team between these two? Because these are two quarterbacks that people are talking about at the next level. Certainly Pickett this year playing himself into potentially the first round of the draft, where many wouldn't have dreamed he was there years ago. And how would you evaluate these two QBs individually as college and even then potentially pro quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think both of these guys are really, really good. And if they were maybe playing for SEC teams or on teams with just a little bit more kind of greater pedigree among the national media, maybe we are still talking about them as Heisman candidates. Tonight, both of them played pretty well. Howell's interception came, at the very end of overtime there. Pickett has been very accurate this season. I think that was only his third or fourth interception of the year. And he put up a bunch of yards, another 300-yard passing game for him. Howell is just under 300 yards. Both of these guys are really accurate. I think if I'm evaluating them, it sort of depends on kind of what you want if you're an NFL team. I think if you want someone who's a little bit more versatile, a little bit, someone who can get out of the pocket and can run and make plays, I think that guy's probably Sam Howell. We saw tonight there, he reaches over the goal line and gets that one touchdown. He's a little bit more kind of fearless, I think, in the run game, maybe a little bit more kind of skilled as a runner. Whereas Pickett, I think, for this season anyways, he's just seeing the field really well, completing passes everywhere, really spreading the love around, really accurate. Is not afraid to, sling it and throw deep passes. So it kind of depends on what you want. If you want the more traditional guy, I like Pickett. If you want someone, a little bit more 2021, this sort of era of quarterback where they can run and stuff a little bit, maybe your guy is Howell. But yeah, I think tonight, despite the score, I think a lot of people expected maybe a game in the 40s or 50s. Both these quarterbacks played well.
Yeah.
Really kind of carried their offenses to overtime. I mean, you look at the rushing totals, neither team cracked 100 yards rushing.
Right.
And both of these guys were under pressure all night. Pickett was sacked 4 times. Sam Howell sacked 5 times. So I think considering all the circumstances, both of these guys played really well.
Yeah, they did play well, and it wasn't a pretty game. This wasn't a game that you're going to really pad your stats, even though they kind of did as well. One thing that jumps off the page of this game that you mentioned was Sam Howell being more of that maybe athletic, elusive. He has a running ability where Pickett's more of a traditional pocket passer style quarterback, even though he's incredibly accurate and throwing up the yards. And we cannot not mention that he ends up setting the Pitt all-time passing record in this game. So his Pitt legacy is just ridiculous. You might even get to that here in a moment. But Sam Howell entering this game with about 700 yards on the ground, only 28 yards in this game, an average of less than 2 per carry. So did that play a factor to you? That seems to be an obvious thing to jump off the page, that Pitt's defense played really well in the first half. Obviously, North Carolina came back in the second half, but you feel like you're not going to just dominate and hold that offense down forever. They're eventually going to do something with Sam Howell, but they forced Sam Howell to try to beat them through the air only. So they didn't really allow the elusiveness. Pitt didn't have the missed tackles they had against Miami or Western Michigan. That's kind of an underrated key to me. Obviously, the defense playing well is a key, but even part of the defense playing well is stopping Sam Howell from picking up those yards on the ground.
Yeah, just kind of looking at it, I would have to look at a lot of the stats this season. But it feels like Pitt, for the most part, has done a good job in defending these scrambling, running quarterbacks. And maybe that's a credit to, Narduzzi and the defensive preparation. They've been beaten through the air, but I think these sort of guys – who can run these RPOs and get out on the edges and kind of kill you with their feet, these quarterbacks. I think for the most part, Pitt has done a good job in bottling those up. So, you got to credit, Serbasi Dennis made a lot of plays tonight. That kind of linebacking core. Yeah, they were kind of all over the place and kind of making sure that Howell didn't really hurt them. That touchdown that he scored was basically sort of a goal line dive. It was in the shotgun and he just sort of tried to find a hole and he got there. But yeah, I mean, you look at the sack totals and Pitt's been one of the best teams in the nation in getting after the quarterback and they did that again tonight. So yeah, I think, maybe in the second half, Sam was able to kind of find some holes and certainly through the air, he was able to make some plays. But for the most part, I do think Pitt did a good job in kind of making him work for it.
Yeah, and he did have a 20-yard run, but only 28 overall yards on the ground for him. Again, an average of only 1.6. Does have the touchdown, but besides that one play, they neutralized him as a runner and made him do it through the air. And he did almost have 300 yards passing, but again, it took them so long to get the offense going. But you look at these North Carolina scores just recently, obviously 58-55 victory over Wake Forest, 44-34 loss to Notre Dame, but that's a top 10 team. 45-42, a win over Miami that Pitt did lose to. So this North Carolina team is hitting their stride in terms of offense and putting up the points, and Pitt's defensive effort was better than any of those teams, win or lose. So you got to hand it to Pitt in that regard. The Panthers do win it 30-23 in a weird one and a longer one than many would have liked, but a win nonetheless in overtime, 30-23. The Panthers now continue their trek looking for a conference championship. Mitchell Northam here joining me from North Carolina Public Radio, bylines at the Associated Press and here at Pittsburgh Sports Now. Now, Mitchell, you watched a lot of college football around the country, certainly beyond even just in the ACC, and Pitt, especially if they would win the ACC, which will be a situation that they're going to play for that conference title, and certainly would have a chance based on the roadmap here, beating North Carolina, them having beat Wake, and Pitt beating Clemson. It feels like Pitt certainly the favorite immensely to win the conference this year, even if you say maybe it's down and doesn't have a truly elite team. How do you feel Pitt stacks up, though, against the elite teams of the country, and maybe not the top 4, but teams that they're legitimately could face in, say, a New Year's Six bowl game, or say the Peach Bowl, or some of these bowl projections that say they win the ACC conference? The ACC winner is not going to be in the playoff this year, obviously, because of what's going on with such a log jam, and 2-loss Pitt team wouldn't be a playoff team. But if Pitt ends up in the top 15 as an ACC champion and they get a solid bowl game, Holiday Bowl, Peach Bowl, maybe even beyond that, there's rumors of Fiesta Bowl. they're going to face you're going to face a good team. You're going to face some really good teams that maybe are only held back off quality losses, whereas Pitt has laid some clunkers there, certainly to Western Michigan. It might be hard to gauge Pitt against the country if you're just watching the ACC and just watching Pitt. How do you think Pitt stacks up? What do you think of some of those matchups? Do you think Pitt has a chance to actually win that potential bowl game against some of those possible matchups?
Yeah, I think Pitt has proven that it can score with anybody in the country.
Right.
This is a team that has put up boatloads of points this year. Tonight was a little bit different, considering the conditions. It was pouring down, raining, but Pitt still got to 30 points. The only times they haven't gotten to 30 this year was against Clemson and Virginia Tech, and they won both of those games. So they didn't really need to get to 30.
No, you did not against those two teams. You did not need to, no.
No. I think Pitt has proven that it can score with anyone in the country. The question is, I think sometimes the consistency of the defense. You look at that Miami game and they give up, 38 points. You look at, the Western Michigan game, you give up, 44 points. Even in Tennessee, this is early on in the season now, but the Tennessee even scored, 30 plus points. So I do think Pitt's defense has shown some good signs, recently, especially how they performed at Virginia Tech and at home against Clemson, last week against Duke. And then tonight they did just enough, to make it tough on Sam Howell and to get after the quarterback and do what they needed to do. They didn't have a turnover though until at the end of the game. I think maybe that's one area of concern. Can they force some more turnovers? But they really got after Howell. The 5 sacks, 11 TFLs. That's really good. They really get after the quarterback. I think it's just sort of the consistency of kind of keeping up with the matchup. I'm not sure what the bowl projections look like right now, but if they face an Ole Miss or if they face an Oklahoma State or
that'll be a fun game against Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin. He's certainly going to be aggressive. That should be a high scoring game.
Yeah, that would be a game that ends up in the 50s probably. Right. I think a lot of these teams, if you're talking about kind of ranked, 7 to 25, one of those teams that Pitt might be able to face, even a Notre Dame.
That's been in some projections for the Holiday Bowl. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Pitt's shown that they can score with anybody. And if the defense is kind of on the right note that day, then they'll make it very difficult on whoever the quarterback is.
Yeah, I think it's clear with this Pitt team and this Pitt season, really, that the defense has held this offense back. And the defense has stepped up at times, but the defense is why they lost to Western Michigan. That's 60 needs for Kenny Pickett, tying a program record. Obviously, that's not the offense's problem. Even the Miami game, the defense didn't play well enough. The defense plays well enough in this game, certainly played well enough against Clemson, but the defense hasn't played well enough all year, which is ironic for Pat Narduzzi to have that be the situation, being a defensive-minded guy. Pitt does win this, though. They do get their 8th win of the year. Virginia and then Syracuse, these next 2 games. Mitchell Northam here joining me on our Pitt post-game show here on PSL and Pittsburgh Sports Now. Now, Mitchell, we're talking about bowl projections and where they stack up against the country and if they would win the conference and all these hypotheticals that we yet don't know. And as you know, with a college football weekend, things can just shake up and be totally different from now till by the time someone's even watching this. So I do want to ask you about what we do know factually. Pitt is going to face Virginia in their next game and then Syracuse after. Now, Pitt normally does pretty well against Syracuse, but they've been competitive in a lot of games against some good teams this year. Virginia, a team that also potentially has a quarterback of note, potentially has an offense to look at. Any concerns if you're a Pitt fan that either one of those teams could trip up Pitt, not necessarily bump them even out of vying for a conference title, because based on the division, they're still kind of in line to make that happen this year, but make this a situation where they're no longer having a chance to top 15 or make this less of a special year? Is Pitt vulnerable? They're going to be favored, but is Pitt vulnerable in either one of those 2 games? Which one of those 2 games would you say is more of a game that Pitt is more vulnerable in, Virginia or Syracuse? Which one of those 2 teams has a better chance to knock off the Panthers? And what would be the keys in those 2 final games?
I think, Virginia is certainly a team that has shown, like Pitt, that it can score with anyone. They lost to BYU last weekend. or the weekend before rather, scoring 49 points. So their defense is maybe a little suspect. They also the week before won at Georgia Tech, 48-40. So they're another team that scores a lot, but also gives up a lot. So can kind of be like Pitt in that way. So that might be a game where, we get the Heinz Field next weekend, and that's another shootout. Virginia is certainly a team that I think Pitt fans, should take seriously. There are only 3 losses this season. They lost to UNC, but they also lost to Wake, and then they lost to BYU. So really, they've beaten, some quality teams this year. They beat Miami, a team that Pitt lost to. They've beaten Louisville and Georgia Tech, and
right.
Like I said, they've shown that they can score with anybody. So this Saturday they're going to play Notre Dame, so I think Saturday is going to be a game to watch. Coming off this bye week, has Virginia kind of carried over that momentum? Has the defense improved? That would be kind of what I look for. Syracuse is a team that's played really good defensively this year. I think has surprised a lot of people. I don't think a lot of people were predicting Syracuse
No.
bowl eligible this season.
Right.
But last week they hold Boston College to 6 points. They almost beat Clemson. That was a 17-14 game. They took Wake Forest to overtime. Their couple of losses are not great. They lost to Rutgers. That's not great. They lost to Florida State. That's not great. But Syracuse has shown that, that they might be a team that sort of plays up or down to their competition.
They need another win to get in a bowl game. They got Louisville, North Carolina State, and then Pitt. So it's not guaranteed they get another 6th victory. You imagine Louisville will be that opportunity, but they got a lot to play for as well.
Yeah, so I mean, if they come into that Pitt game, with only 5 wins on the season, if they lose at Louisville and at NC State, they're going to be playing like a team with nothing to lose, like we just saw North Carolina do tonight. So that could be a little bit dangerous. The good kind of saving grace is that, if Pitt beats Virginia, this next weekend, then they've wrapped up the coastal title pretty much. Syracuse is in the Atlantic, so no need to really worry there if you do have a hiccup, but you don't want to. You want to kind of keep that momentum rolling if you're going to be playing in Charlotte in December against Wake Forest. You want to be crossing your T's and dotting your I's and on your P's and Q's at that point.
You do want to, yeah. You want to dot the I there and Pitt and cross those 2 T's, and not something Pitt has always done in the past. And certainly you want this to be one of those years that, unlike when they were playing Clemson for the ACC title a few years ago, when they won the Coastal, it was a down division. It was a year that Pitt really wasn't that good. They just kind of were a default champion. Then they got blown out. If Pitt's going to be there this year, certainly with Kenny Pickett riding off into sunset, they want it to be a year where they're riding high and they feel like they can legit contend and legit win that and then legit win the bowl game. So you don't want to get tripped up. I would think Virginia would be that team to be more of a concern than Syracuse, even though they played some teams tough, just because that's the roadmap. And it was North Carolina as well, that Western Michigan, Miami, teams that have offenses, maybe not a defense, that have a good quarterback that can score. Those are the teams that give Pitt problems. But if Pitt shows up with even this defensive effort, they probably would be okay in that game, because you are facing a Virginia team that has even worse of a defense than what Pitt's put up most of this season. Mitchell, I definitely appreciate the time, especially the longer time than we would have thought here as this game lingered on. So I will let you go on with the rest of your night. I definitely appreciate the time. We'll be seeing and reading you, I'm sure, here even on Pittsburgh Sports Now throughout the year, whether it be football or basketball here at some point. I'm sure we'll go to you. And then also with whatever you're doing there with the Associated Press and North Carolina Public Radio, et cetera. So I definitely appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And if Pitt makes it to Charlotte, I'll be there. So
yeah,
it'll be a good matchup. Don't want to put the cart before the horse, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. You got that in your backyard. So you will be there and you'll be helping us out with that. So we definitely appreciate it here in advance. It is looking like that, but you don't want to put the cart before you're the horse if you're Pitt by any means. And they almost did that in this game and end up getting the victory nonetheless. So that was Mitchell Northam here, of course, joining me of North Carolina Public Radio. So he has that North Carolina insight there, also living and breathing in that area. and also has bylines at the Associated Press, several other outlets that also include here us at Pittsburgh Sports Now. He's a stringer for us here at PSN. So you will be reading him, potentially even, of course, in the ACC title game, whether covering it for us or elsewhere. He will be involved. You will read and you will hear and you will see Mitchell Northam. Great conversation with him there. I'm really admiring the backdrop there. I enjoy all those pictures there, those Sports Illustrated covers, Larry Bird and several others. And like Allen, he has his press passes there. I wish I kept all of mine. I just don't, so I can't make that cool collage. Pitt does get the victory, though. Pitt does win, and that is the most important thing at this point in the year. We've seen a lot of teams get upset. We've seen a lot of teams play poorly, and Pitt able, whether they're playing well or not, and they didn't look great against Duke really either, but no fans there. The weather there also sucked. It's like a high school field out there, really, when you're on the road. It's hard to get into that game. This, a game to get into, started off strong, not really ending strong, but getting the win nonetheless and doing it in overtime with the weather not cooperating either. Pitt does get the win, their 8th win of the year, which that's a nice number for Narduzzi, but he wants that 9. It'll be the first time under Narduzzi Pitt would have had 9 wins if they do get one more. That'll be big for him. His job was even in doubt the first few weeks of this season. Whipple, criticized by many Pitt fans, Pitt media before this season. Kenny Pickett, hated by some prior to this season, prior to the year earlier, ends up as the all-time leading passer. They're kind of quieting some doubters this year, to say the least. Certainly Pickett in particular as putting up a legacy that's right there with anybody else in Pitt history, regardless of what he would do in the future in the NFL. And he's certainly making himself some money no matter what his career may tell. He's going to be that draft pick. He's going to be likely that first-round pick. And who knows if top 15, top 10, if he keeps playing like this based on some projections. So Kenny Pickett and the Pitt Panthers do enough. They get the victory. They win over North Carolina 30-23 in overtime. Pitt gets their 8th win of the year as they continue to drive towards Charlotte, North Carolina, to drive towards the Coastal Division Championship and to drive towards an ACC conference crown. And then, of course, a solid bowl game, a major bowl game, a New Year's Six bowl game, and that's what you want here at Pitt. That was the goal before the year. The playoffs not going to happen, but that was the goal before the year, and that is very much in front of this Pitt program with this win, no matter how ugly it maybe looked at times to get there. Again, for Mitchell Northam, for all of us at Pittsburgh Sports Now and Pittsburgh Sports Live, hit that subscribe button bottom of this video if you're there. Sorry I didn't get to some of you in the chat there, but I did enjoy my conversation with Mitchell nonetheless. And we'll be talking to you here, of course, on another one of these post-game shows, whether it be Pitt or else.